When did the I crave attention kid go too far? Mason started in my 8th grade class in September with the kind of energy that demanded every eye in the room. He'd interrupt lessons with random facts, drop his books loudly during quiet work time, laugh too hard at jokes nobody else thought were funny. The classic attention-seeking behavior I'd seen 100 times in 15 years of teaching. I figured he'd settle down after a few weeks once he made friends and felt secure. He didn't settle down. By October, Mason had escalated to wearing increasingly bizarre outfits. A cape one day, a top hat the next, face paint for no reason on a Wednesday. Other teachers started complaining that he was disrupting their classes too, always volunteering to read aloud, always raising his hand even when he didn't know the answer. I pulled him aside after class one day and asked if everything was okay at home. He said everything was great and that he just liked making people smile. The way he said it felt rehearsed, like he'd been preparing for someone to ask. Around Halloween, I noticed other students started avoiding Mason. Not in an obvious bullying way, but subtle. They'd shift their desks away when group work started. Nobody sat with him at lunch anymore. When I asked Sarah, one of my reliable students, what was going on, she got this uncomfortable look and said Mason was just being weird. I pressed her on what weird meant, but she just shook her head and walked away. The really strange part was that Mason's attention-seeking got worse as kids pulled away. He'd show up with props, magic tricks that never worked, printed memes he'd try to explain to anyone who'd listen. During my planning period, I saw him following younger students in the hallway, talking at them while they walked faster. One morning in November, I found Mason in my classroom before school started. He was sitting at a desk crying, real tears, not the fake kind some kids use for sympathy. I asked what was wrong, and he said nobody liked him anymore. That everyone thought he was a creep, and it wasn't fair because he was just trying to make friends. The word creep stuck with me. That's a specific word middle schoolers don't usually use casually. I started paying closer attention. Mason had this habit of standing too close to people during conversations. His phone was always out during passing periods, pointed at random angles. He'd ask personal questions that made kids uncomfortable. What time do you get home from school? Do your parents work late? Do you have your own bedroom? The kind of questions that sound innocent on the surface but feel wrong in context. I mentioned it to our school counselor, who said she'd received 3 separate reports from parents about Mason making their kids uncomfortable, but nothing concrete enough to take action on. Just that he was being too friendly, but too interested in their private lives. In early December, Mason brought elaborate homemade gifts to school, hand-drawn portraits of classmates he barely knew. Poems about specific students. A bracelet he'd made for Emma with her name spelled out in beads, even though they'd never had a conversation. Emma's mom called the school that afternoon, her voice shaking with controlled anger. She wanted to know why a boy was giving her daughter romantic gifts when Emma had never expressed interest, why nobody had told her Mason had been asking Emma's friends about her schedule and her home address. Our principal pulled Mason's parents in for a meeting that week. I wasn't part of it, but I saw them leave. Mason's mother looking completely blindsided, his father's face red with what looked like shame. After that, Mason was removed from my class and put in Miss Patterson's room across the hall. The official reason was scheduling conflicts. The real reason became clear when Principal Harris called an emergency staff meeting after school. She explained that several students had finally come forward together, safety in numbers, and told their parents what Mason had been doing. That's when I learned the full extent of his attention-seeking behavior. And what I discovered made me realize we'd all been focused on the wrong warning signs the entire time. The rest of the story is on my channel or linked below. Principal Harris stands at the front of the staff lounge, her normally composed demeanor replaced by something I've never seen in 15 years of teaching: raw, unfiltered anger, mixed with profound sadness. The fluorescent lights seem harsher than usual, as 23 educators sit in stunned silence. What Mason has been doing, she continues, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, goes far beyond attention-seeking behavior. He's been systematically recording students without their knowledge or consent. The words hang in the air like poison. I feel my stomach twist as she clicks to the next slide in her presentation, a diagram of the school with red dots marking locations where hidden cameras were discovered. Several students came forward together yesterday after finding what appeared to be a small camera hidden in the girls' locker room vent. Upon investigation, we found similar devices in 2 bathroom stalls and the changing area for physical education. Miss Patterson, who's been teaching across the hall from me for over a decade, raises her hand. How long has this been happening? Principal Harris's jaw tightens, based on timestamps from the recovered footage, since approximately 3 weeks after he arrived in September. The month Mason started at our school. While I was busy documenting his outbursts and bizarre clothing choices in my teaching journal, he was creating an elaborate system to violate his classmates' privacy. I feel physically ill. The police executed a search warrant at Mason's home last night. Principal Harris continues. They found multiple electronic devices containing thousands of images. Some were taken with hidden cameras, others with his phone during what appeared to be normal classroom activities. I think about Mason's phone always being out during passing periods, pointed at seemingly random angles. How blind I'd been. Many photos focus specifically on female students in various stages of undress. There's evidence he's been sharing these images through encrypted messaging apps for months. The school counselor, Miss Jimenez, who I'd spoken to about Mason's inappropriate questions, looks devastated. I knew something was off, but I never imagined. None of us did, Principal Harris says, but her words offer little comfort. Mason's parents were completely unaware. His mother nearly collapsed when detectives showed her what they'd found. His father, she pauses. His father admitted Mason had been caught filming his older cousin in the bathroom during a family gathering last summer, but they believed it was an isolated incident after family counseling. My mind races back through every interaction with Mason, his strategic positioning near certain students, the way he'd insert himself into conversations, his seemingly random appearances in hallways. The pieces clicked together with nauseating clarity. His entire personality at school was a calculated performance designed to distract from his true intentions. The most disturbing part, Principal Harris continues, is how he used his reputation as the weird, attention-seeking kid to hide in plain sight. When students began feeling uncomfortable around him, they couldn't articulate why because his overt behaviors masked the covert ones. I think about Sarah's uncomfortable look when I asked why students were avoiding Mason, how she said he was being weird but couldn't explain further. They sensed something predatory but couldn't identify it beneath the camouflage of his class clown antics. Several parents called me in tears last night, Principal Harris says. They described their daughters coming home hysterical after being shown photos of themselves that were taken in what they believed were private moments. One father told me his daughter is now afraid to use any bathroom outside their home. The weight of responsibility settles over me like concrete. I should have recognized the pattern, the inappropriate questions about bedrooms and schedules, the strategic positioning with his phone, the way he targeted younger, more vulnerable students. All the warning signs were there, but I'd categorized them under the familiar label of attention-seeking behavior, instead of seeing the predatory pattern underneath. Moving forward, Principal Harris says, we will have mandatory training on recognizing predatory grooming behaviors. The school board has approved emergency funding for counseling services for affected students, and will be conducting a complete security audit of all facilities. After the meeting, I stay seated while others file out, many wiping away tears or speaking in hushed, shocked tones. Principal Harris approaches me, sitting in the chair beside mine. This isn't your fault, you know, she says quietly. I saw the signs, I whisper. I just misinterpreted them completely. We all did, she replies. Mason was extraordinarily calculated. He deliberately crafted his attention-seeking persona to hide behind. When students or teachers became uncomfortable, he'd escalate his antics to redirect focus away from the real issue. I think about the elaborate gifts he made, the hand-drawn portraits, the personalized bracelet for Emma. They weren't innocent attempts at friendship. They were ways to document his targets, to establish inappropriate connections, to test boundaries. The police need to speak with all teachers who had regular contact with Mason. Principal Harris says they'll want to know about any behavioral patterns you observed, students he focused on, anything that might help them understand the full scope of his activities. I nod, trying to process how completely I'd misread the situation. All those times I thought Mason was just a lonely kid, desperate for friends. He was actually documenting, cataloging, and exploiting his classmates' most private moments. There will be a parent meeting tomorrow evening, Principal Harris adds. They'll have questions about how this happened, how we missed it. I need all staff present. As I gather my things to leave, I stop at the door. What happens to Mason now? Principal Harris looks up from her notes, her expression grim. He's in juvenile detention pending a psychological evaluation. Given the nature and extent of his actions, the district attorney is considering whether to pursue charges that would follow him into adulthood. Walking back to my empty classroom, I pass the spot where I found Mason crying that morning in November. Those tears, I now realize, weren't about being disliked or misunderstood. They were the manipulative tactics of someone who feared his cover was being blown, who needed to reinforce his image as the harmless attention seeker, rather than what he truly was. I sit at my desk and begin documenting everything I can remember about Mason's behavior since September. Every question, every strange interaction, every moment I dismissed as merely annoying rather than dangerous. The red flags were always there. I just couldn't see the predator behind the class clown. The days following the staff meeting blur together. I find myself sitting in a small room at the police station, a detective with tired eyes and a notebook across from me. She asks questions about Mason's behavior patterns that make me re-examine every interaction through a horrifying new lens. We recovered approximately 4,732 images from his devices, she says, her voice clinical, but her expression grim. Many were organized into folders with students' names. My stomach lurches. Folders with names? She nods. He had detailed systems for cataloging. Some students had multiple subfolders labeled by location or clothing type. I think about the meticulous way Mason organized his backpack, how his notebooks were color-coded by subject. The same obsessive attention to detail had been applied to his exploitation of classmates. The technical team found sophisticated encryption software on his laptop, she continues. He was operating multiple accounts on platforms specifically designed for sharing this type of content. He's 14, I whisper, still struggling to reconcile the Mason I thought I knew with this calculated predator. Unfortunately, age doesn't limit technical aptitude, she responds. His online footprint suggests he's been engaged in these activities for nearly 18 months, predating his arrival at your school. I remember Mason's father mentioning the isolated incident with his cousin, not isolated at all. When I return to school the next day, the atmosphere is unrecognizable. Security personnel stand at hallway intersections. Parents cluster outside, some embracing tearful children, others speaking heatedly with administrators. Through the main office window, I spot Principal Harris surrounded by what appear to be lawyers. Miss Patterson intercepts me before I reach my classroom. Have you seen the news? I shake my head. 3 of the parents found their daughter's photos on websites. Her voice cracks. The images had been online for months. Some had thousands of views. The weight of this revelation hits me physically. I lean against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. Sarah's parents are filing a lawsuit against the district, she continues. They're saying we failed to protect the students despite obvious warning signs. I think about Sarah's uncomfortable expression when I'd asked why students were avoiding Mason. She knew something was wrong but couldn't articulate it because we'd created an environment where his predatory behaviors were dismissed as mere attention-seeking. The parent meeting that evening is unlike anything I've experienced in 15 years of teaching. The gymnasium fills beyond capacity. Faces etched with fear, anger, and betrayal stare back at us as Principal Harris attempts to explain the situation without compromising the ongoing investigation. "My daughter can't sleep," one mother shouts, rising from her seat. "She keeps checking for cameras in our bathroom vents. How did none of you notice what was happening?" Another parent, a father whose hands shake as he speaks, describes his son's panic attack after learning his changing room photos had been shared online. He was in Mason's PE class. Now he refuses to change for gym, refuses to use school bathrooms. He's terrified of being watched. Principal Harris acknowledges each concern with remarkable composure, though I can see the toll it's taking. "We've contracted a security firm to conduct a comprehensive sweep of all facilities. They've already removed several additional recording devices that weren't initially discovered." A collective gasp ripples through the crowd. "How many?" someone demands. 7 additional cameras, Principal Harris admits. Most were inactive and appeared to have been installed as backups. The revelation that Mason had installed redundant systems shows a level of planning that makes my skin crawl. This wasn't impulsive behavior, it was calculated, patient, methodical. After the meeting, I find Emma's parents waiting by my classroom door. Emma, whose personalized bracelet from Mason I'd thought was a sweet gesture from a lonely boy trying to make friends. "Emma found a camera in her bedroom last night," her mother says without preamble, her voice hollow. "The police think Mason planted it during the study group you arranged at our house in November." The memory hits me like a physical blow. I'd organized that study session specifically to help Mason integrate with his peers. He'd asked to use the bathroom 3 times during those 2 hours. I'd thought he was nervous. Now I realize he was mapping the house, looking for placement opportunities. "I'm so sorry," I whisper, knowing the words are wholly inadequate. Emma's father looks at me with red-rimmed eyes. "She trusted him because you trusted him. You vouched for him. In Dallins." There's nothing I can say to that. They're right. The following morning, a detailed timeline of Mason's activities is shared with staff. Police forensic analysis revealed he'd been systematically recording students since his 3rd day at school. The random disruptions in class, his elaborate costumes, his dramatic questions, his performances all coincided perfectly with moments he needed to reposition recording devices or capture specific angles. His outbursts weren't random at all. Ms. Jimenez explains during our emergency training session, they were strategically timed distractions. While we were dealing with his behavior, he was setting up his next recording opportunity. The school psychologist walks us through Mason's pattern. He would create a spectacle, draw all attention to himself, then use the aftermath when everyone was discussing his behavior, rather than watching his movements to execute the actual predatory actions. "This is why traditional warning signs were missed," she explains. "His attention-seeking behaviors weren't the problem. They were the smokescreen hiding the real problem." I think about all the times I documented Mason's disruptions in my teaching journal, the day he wore 6 different hats stacked on his head. In the morning, he asked increasingly inappropriate questions about my personal life. The afternoon, he accidentally knocked over the class project display. Each incident perfectly aligned with times he'd been caught on security footage, adjusting hidden cameras, or following specific students. The police investigation reveals something even more disturbing. Mason had created elaborate online personas to distribute the images. He operated accounts on multiple platforms, trading photos of our students for similar content from predators across the country. The detective tells us they've identified victims from at least 7 different schools in his digital network. "This wasn't impulsive behavior," she explains. "This was a sophisticated operation with planning that extended months before he even arrived at your school." I remember Mason's questions during his first week about bathroom pass policies, about which teachers monitored which hallways, about the school security camera placement. I'd thought he was anxious about navigating a new environment. In reality, he was conducting reconnaissance. By Friday, the full scope of Mason's activities becomes clear. His behavior pattern reveals months of calculated planning. The attention-seeking persona was deliberately crafted as a perfect cover. Who would suspect the weird kid who seemed desperate for any kind of recognition was actually executing a methodical plan to exploit his profits? Classmates? As I pack up my classroom materials for the weekend, I find a drawing Mason had given me back in October, a surprisingly skilled sketch of our classroom. What I had interpreted as artistic talent now reveals itself as something sinister. He'd marked optimal camera angles with slightly darker pencil strokes, mapped sight lines from his preferred seats, documented blind spots in the room's layout. The class clown wasn't seeking attention, he was hiding behind it. I spend the entire weekend reviewing every interaction I ever had with Mason, searching for the warning signs I missed. By Monday morning, my teaching journal is filled with highlighted passages, notes in the margins where I've reinterpreted behaviors I once found merely disruptive or attention-seeking. The school psychologist, Dr. Mercer, sits across from me in the empty conference room, reviewing my notes. Her expression remains professionally neutral, but I catch the subtle tightening around her eyes as she turns each page. "You documented quite thoroughly," she says finally, closing the journal. "But you were documenting the wrong things." "I thought I was being observant," I say, the words hollow even to my own ears. "I was actually missing everything important." She slides a folder across the table. "This is part of the police report I've been authorized to share with staff. It shows the correlation between Mason's most disruptive classroom incidents and his recording activities. I open the folder with trembling hands. Inside is a timeline with two parallel tracks, one showing Mason's documented classroom disruptions, the other showing when hidden cameras were placed or adjusted based on digital timestamps. The correlation is undeniable. Every major outburst perfectly preceded or followed a recording setup. His phone positioning wasn't random at all, I whisper, remembering how often I'd seen Mason with his phone at odd angles. He was using calculated positions to capture specific views. Dr. Mercer nods. The detective described it as strategic recording triangulation. He'd position himself to capture multiple angles of the same target. I think about Mason's desk changes, how he'd frequently ask to move because of distractions or trouble seeing the board. Each new position gave him different sightlines, different recording opportunities. What about his outfits? I ask, remembering the ridiculous costumes that had become his trademark. The 6 hats stacked on his head, the mismatched shoes. Misdirection, Dr. Mercer explains. When everyone's looking at the bright, unusual thing, they don't notice the subtle, dangerous thing. Classic sleight of hand. While teachers and students were focused on his outlandish appearance, his hands were free to position recording devices. The realization hits me like a physical blow. His disruptions were calculated distractions. Exactly, and very effective ones. There's a knock at the door, and Miss Jimenez, the school counselor, enters. Her normally warm expression is replaced by something harder, more guarded. She takes a seat beside Dr. Mercer, without looking directly at me. I need to show you something, she says, opening her laptop. The administration has authorized me to share this with key staff members. She turns the screen toward me. It's a spreadsheet with dates going back to October, just a month after Mason arrived. These are reports from students about Mason that were submitted to the counseling office, she explains, her voice tight. Most were vague concerns that didn't trigger our usual protocols for intervention. I scan the list, my heart sinking with each entry. October 12, makes comments about what I wear when no one else is around. October 29, always seems to know when I change for PE, even though we have different periods. November 8, asks weird questions about my bedroom. November 17, shows up in bathroom at same time every day. The list continues, page after page of subtle warnings that individually seemed minor, but collectively painted a clear picture of predatory behavior. Why wasn't this information shared with teachers? I ask, unable to keep the accusation from my voice. Yeah, Miss Jimenez flinches slightly. Some of it was, in general terms, but most of these reports were categorized as social adjustment issues because we all labeled him as the harmless attention seeker. I finish for her. She nods, not meeting my eyes. The administration decided his behaviors fell under existing accommodations for social integration. His parents had provided documentation about his difficulty making friends at previous schools. So we created the perfect environment for him to operate in, I say, the realization washing over me like ice water. We gave him the benefit of every doubt. There's more, Dr. Mercer says quietly. The forensic analysis of his devices showed he specifically chose our school after researching disciplinary policies online. He targeted us because of our progressive approach to behavioral management. The calculated nature of it all makes me physically ill. Mason hadn't randomly ended up in our school. He'd selected us specifically because our emphasis on inclusion and understanding created the perfect cover for his activities. What about the bathroom passes? I ask, remembering how frequently Mason asked to use the restroom during class. Was that part of it too? Miss Jimenez nods. The police found a detailed map of the school on his computer, with optimal times to access different bathrooms based on class schedules. He'd figured out exactly when certain students would be using specific facilities. I think about all the times I'd signed his bathroom pass without a second thought, assuming he had a medical issue or was just using it as an excuse to wander the halls. In reality, I was authorizing his hunting expeditions. The most disturbing part, Dr. Mercer continues, is that he deliberately escalated his visible behaviors whenever he sensed scrutiny of his covert ones. When students started avoiding him because they felt uncomfortable, he'd create a spectacle that forced us to focus on managing the obvious disruption, rather than investigating the underlying cause of their discomfort. I remember the day several girls had moved their desks away from Mason, and how he'd responded by launching into an impromptu, loud rendition of a popular song. I'd been so focused on quieting him down that I never questioned why the girls had moved in the first place. Example, Principal Harris joins us, looking exhausted. We just finished another parent meeting, she says, sinking into a chair. They've formed a coalition to demand systemic changes to our security and monitoring procedures. What happens now? I ask. The school board has approved emergency funding for comprehensive training on recognizing predatory grooming behaviors. She explains, every staff member will participate. They've also authorized a complete security overhaul and additional counseling resources for affected students. What about Mason? Miss Jimenez asks. Principal Harris's expression hardens. The juvenile court judge denied bail given the extent and nature of his activities. The psychological evaluation indicates he shows classic signs of predatory calculation with no remorse. His parents have withdrawn him from the district and are cooperating fully with authorities. As we prepare to leave, Principal Harris stops me at the door. This isn't just on you, she says quietly. We all missed the signs because we were looking for the wrong things. The entire system failed these students. Her words offer little comfort as I walk back to my classroom. On my desk is a stack of letters from parents, some understanding, others filled with anger and accusations. One from Emma's mother simply asks, "How could you not see what was happening right in front of you?" I have no answer that feels adequate. I was trained to identify attention-seeking behaviors, to redirect disruptive students, and to create inclusive environments, but I was never taught to recognize when attention-seeking was actually a cover for something far more sinister. The predator had been hiding in plain sight, and I had given him the perfect camouflage. The juvenile courtroom feels nothing like I imagined. It's smaller, more intimate, with wood paneling that attempts warmth but fails against the gravity of what's happening. Mason sits at the defendant's table, shoulders hunched beneath a button-down shirt that looks too big for him. His parents flank him like sentinels, his mother still wearing that shell-shocked expression, his father staring straight ahead with rigid posture. I'm here as a witness, seated in the back row, where I can observe without being immediately visible. Principal Harris sits beside me, her normally immaculate appearance showing subtle signs of strain, a missed button on her blazer, hair pulled back more severely than usual. The court finds sufficient evidence to proceed with charges of production and distribution of exploitative material involving minors. The judge announces, her voice steady and clinical. Given the systematic nature of the offenses and the psychological evaluation findings, the defendant will remain in juvenile detention pending trial. Mason doesn't react visibly. No trembling lip, no tears, just that same blank expression I'd seen countless times when redirecting his behavior in class. I wonder now if that emptiness had always been there, hidden beneath his elaborate performances. Outside the courtroom, Principal Harris touches my elbow gently. The school board approved everything, she says. Comprehensive training starts next week. They're bringing in specialists from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Will it be enough? I ask, the weight of my failure still crushing. It's a start, she replies. We're also implementing new security protocols, counseling resources, and a complete overhaul of how we identify and respond to concerning behaviors. The training begins the following Monday. Every staff member, teachers, administrators, custodians, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, sits in the auditorium as Dr. Mercer introduces the program. What we previously categorized as attention-seeking behavior requires more nuanced analysis, she explains, standing before slides showing the patterns we all missed. Predatory grooming often hides behind disruptive behaviors that draw focus away from the actual exploitation. We learn to recognize the difference between a student seeking genuine connection and one testing boundaries for exploitation. We study case studies of predators who, like Mason, deliberately created personas that made adults less likely to recognize their true intentions. The most dangerous predators, the FBI specialist tells us, are those who understand how to manipulate institutional blind spots. They study your policies, identify your biases, and exploit your assumptions. I think about how Mason had researched our school before enrolling, how he'd selected us specifically because our progressive discipline approach created the perfect environment for his activities. The thought makes me physically ill. The training is exhaustive 8-hour days of confronting our failures, recognizing patterns we should have seen, learning to differentiate between typical teenage behavior and predatory warning signs. By Friday, I feel both overwhelmed and strangely empowered. I can't change what happened, but I can ensure I never miss these signs again. The following week, students return to a transformed school. Security cameras monitor previously vulnerable areas, bathroom passes require digital tracking, and a new anonymous reporting system allows students to flag concerning behaviors without fear of retaliation. Most importantly, every adult in the building now knows what to look for. Sarah approaches me after third period, hovering by my desk until the room empties. My parents dropped the lawsuit, she says quietly. Principal Harris showed them all the new safety measures. I'm so sorry we failed you, I tell her, the words inadequate but necessary. She shrugs, picking at her thumbnail. I tried to tell people something was off with him. I just didn't know how to explain it. That's on us, I say. We should have given you the language and the space to express those concerns. The school counseling department has been expanded with trauma specialists who work with affected students. Emma, whose bedroom camera discovery still haunts me, meets with a therapist 3 times weekly. Her parents requested a different teacher, which I understand completely. Some wounds can't be healed with apologies. During a staff meeting in late February, Miss Patterson shares something that finally brings tears to my eyes. The students have created their own peer support network, she says. They're teaching each other about boundaries, about trusting their instincts when something feels wrong. Principal Harris nods. They're doing what we should have done, creating a culture where speaking up is valued more than staying silent. The guilt remains, a constant companion as I move through my days. I still review my teaching journal each evening, searching for other warning signs I might have missed, other students who might need protection I failed to provide. The school psychologist tells me this hypervigilance is normal, part of processing my role in what happened. You can't change the past, she reminds me during our weekly check-in, but you can transform how you approach these situations in the future. In March, I receive a letter from the Juvenile Detention Center where Mason is being held. His therapist explains that part of his treatment involves acknowledging the impact of his actions on others. He's requested permission to write letters of apology to staff members. I stare at the permission form for days before finally signing it. When Mason's letter arrives, it sits unopened on my desk for a week before I find the courage to read it. His handwriting is meticulous. Each letter perfectly formed the same precision he applied to organizing his exploitation of our student. The content is what you'd expect from mandatory therapy: acknowledgement of harm, expression of remorse, commitment to change. But there's something mechanical about it, something that reads like performance rather than genuine contrition. In the final paragraph, he writes, I chose your classroom because you saw what you expected to see. I learned that if I acted weird enough, people would stop looking deeper. Those words haunt me more than anything else. He's right. I saw what I expected to see, categorized him according to familiar patterns, and never questioned the discrepancies. The class clown, the attention seeker, the harmless disruption labels that provided the perfect cover for predatory behavior. Anti-SEC. By April, our school has become a case study in recognizing and preventing exploitation. Educators from neighboring districts observe our new protocols, and Principal Harris presents our comprehensive approach at a national conference on school safety. Mason's case has transformed how we differentiate between attention-seeking and predatory grooming, she explains to a room full of administrators. We've learned that disruption isn't always the problem. Sometimes it's the smokescreen hiding the real danger. I still struggle with guilt, with the knowledge that I was the unwitting accomplice in Mason's scheme. But I channel that guilt into vigilance, into creating classroom environments where students feel safe reporting uncomfortable interactions, where boundary violations are taken seriously regardless of who commits them. The last time I see Mason is through a courthouse window as he's transferred to a specialized juvenile facility for long-term treatment. He looks smaller somehow, stripped of the elaborate persona he'd constructed. As the van pulls away, I wonder if he'll ever understand the depth of harm he caused, or if the performance was always who he truly was. What I know with certainty is this: I will never again dismiss subtle warnings because they don't fit my preconceived notions of what danger looks like. Sometimes the most dangerous predators aren't lurking in shadows, they're performing in the spotlight, counting on us to watch the show instead of seeing what's happening behind the curtain.